What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the White and Gold Talk podcast. And we are coming to you guys after the Cavs 131-108 win over the Toronto Raptors, obviously in the sixth. And guys, me and Chris are both also trying to get to our respective trips. We know that the Cavaliers players have trips scheduled to Cabo, Tulum, the Dominican Republic, wherever you might think all these players outside of the coaching staff and some of the players, obviously the three All-Stars going to San Francisco, have planned. So I'm going to run through some of the stats now, and then we'll get into the regular outlook and analysis of the game through that. The reason I'm doing this, of course, is because we're going into the All-Star break. I want to break down where the Cavs are. So let's do this. 44-10, best in the East. 19-6 on the road, second best in the NBA. 25-4 at home. That's the best in the Eastern Conference. 8-1 in their last 9 games. 8-2 if you want to stretch it out to 10 games. Cleveland has now hit 10 or more three-pointers in 59 straight games, the third longest streak of 10 or more three-pointers in NBA history. With 131 points scored tonight, the Cavs now have a franchise single-season record of 15 games of 130 or more points per game in a game this season. Obviously, we know, and we've talked about this stat before, for this stat, they came into the season with the franchise record for a single season being 5. So they tripled that. The 5 games of 130 or more points were in 2016, 2017, and 2017-2018. Then you look and you understand the fact that this might be the craziest stat that I was able to pull up. The Cavs' magic number to clinch a postseason spot is 5. We're at the All-Star break. There's 28 games left in the season. Next, we want to look at how the Cavs are 38-2 outside of 2 rough stretches that saw them lost 3 out of 5 games from November 19th to November 29th, and when they lost 5 out of 8 games from January 12th to January 25th. Then we also understand where this Cavs team has sat at the All-Star break in previous seasons. This season, 44-10. Last year, it was 36-17. The previous season before that, 2022. 2023, it was 38-23. 2021, 2022, 35-23. Obviously, we know that this Cavs team has proven to be a first half of the season team, but it's more about how the Cavs finish. But the luxury of where the Cavs are sitting currently in the Eastern Conference is that they don't have to have so much of a similar trajectory in the second half. For the last 3 years, 23, 2024, they were 12-17 in the second half of the season. 2022, 2023, they were 13-8. 2021, 2022, they were 9-18. And finally, we understand, this is where I want to start for Chris's questioning. DeAndre Hunter's second game saw the second time in a row that the Cavs have held a team under 20 points in the first quarter. Obviously, the Cavs had 41. They held the Toronto Raptors to just 17 in the first quarter, 12 of those 41 coming from Max Strus. And then in their previous matchup against Minnesota, the Cavs scored 30 points, holding the Timberwolves to 12 points in the first quarter. Chris, I know that's a mouthful, and I just had to run through all of that. But looking at how much DeAndre Hunter has acclimated already, you've now, obviously, small sample size, have gotten to see the Cavs and Kenny Atkinson utilize him as a starter, as a bench player, and just the defensive presence that he adds alongside Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. What are your thoughts going into the second half of the season, and especially what you saw tonight?
I mean, he's a seamless fit, and I think he thought that coming into the team, and I think the Cavs believed that when they made the trade for him. You know, they don't give up the things that they were willing to give up when they were sitting with the best record in the Eastern Conference if they didn't believe in him, if they didn't believe that he was going to be an on-court fit and an off-court fit, and he has been. You know, he's shooting the ball well. He's showing that he can score in a variety of ways. Defensively, he's challenging shots. He's moving his feet, staying in front of guys. So I think, you know, when you add somebody like that, whether he's going to start, whether he's going to come off the bench, it just feels like it makes it a more complete team. It's hard to sit here and say that there was a quote unquote missing piece for a team that was the number one seed in the Eastern Conference and a legitimate title contender before making the trades. But it did feel like he was a missing piece. It did feel like he was somebody that the Cavs needed if they were going to really challenge Boston, if they were going to get to the NBA Finals. So his first two games have been really good, and it looks like a seamless fit. But this trade wasn't made with February in mind or March in mind. It was about getting to June. As Max Strus said the other night, it's about getting to hopefully June. And the belief is that DeAndre's greatest impact is going to come in the playoffs when you have to deal with Boston, you have to deal with New York, maybe Milwaukee. Who knows who comes out of the Western Conference? Guys like DeAndre Hunter are built for playoff success. Guys like DeAndre Hunter give you a better chance from a matchup standpoint, not against the Toronto Raptors, but against teams like Oklahoma City, Houston, Denver, the best teams in the NBA that you would consider legitimate threats. And you're seeing evidence of that kind of style in these first two games. Ignore the stats, ignore the plus minus, ignore the other stuff. It's just like how he brings this team together and the different options that they have and the different lineup flexibility and the different kinds of 5-man groupings, 4-man groupings, 3-man groupings that the Cavs can use because of a player with his particular skill set.
And Chris, I'm glad that you brought up the lineup data because I'll get to that in a second. But I mean, you've obviously seen it, and even like casual fans who are on the Twitterverse, on the internet, have been like, this might be the smoothest offense. This might be the best, most potent defense that the Cavs have had. And it's just been 2 games with DeAndre Hunter. And when you talk about what he brings offensively, obviously tonight he had 18 points, 4 3-pointers. Those are big time, especially on a team that just lost George Niang and Karis LeVert, who were 2 of their bigger 3-point threats. But I also wanted to touch on the fact that what you mentioned, it being a move to increase what they already had. Like, this team was already on pace to be one of the best in the Eastern Conference, if not to end the season as the top team in the Eastern Conference. And it was only to make this team better. And obviously you mentioned it on the latest podcast. Darius Garland mentioned it in a pregame presser. I think it was last week. Like, just the understanding that they had the chemistry, the camaraderie built up with Karis LeVert and George Niang. But this is a strategic move. It's a business-like move that they know makes them to a whole nother level. And I think, sadly enough, for the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are without 2 of their best players, and the Toronto Raptors, who are without Brandon Ingram, who hasn't played since December 7th and don't know really when he's going to come back, like, these teams have gotten the brunt of the defensive prowess that DeAndre Hunter has provided at the forefront of his debut and his first impression. But Chris, the second portion of what you mentioned is the matchup data and also the lineup data that we've already been able to curate throughout the season. And a lot of people, when we both posted on X, formerly Twitter, ahead of the game that Max Strus was coming back and was going to start, everybody was like, well, where's DeAndre Hunter going? Is he going to be the 4-man? Is he going to, like, I don't know. Like, it was hilarious to see how discombobulated the Cavs franchise or Cavs fan base got when they saw that Max Strus was going to get the starting minutes over DeAndre Hunter. And it's for 2 reasons, I think. One, well, actually 3 reasons if you look at it this way. One, Max Strus has been one of the best 5-man lineups when it comes to playing next to the core 4 this season. He has a net rating of 32.3, and that only improved after tonight's game, right? The offensive rating skyrocketed. I think it was about 7 points per 100 possessions from what it was entering tonight's game. Then you talk about Kenny Atkinson continuously to learn where to put DeAndre Hunter, whether he's better as a starter, whether he's better off the bench, and what lineups he wants to put him in. And I said this a couple days ago, even with Dean Wade being out, there's already the feel that Kenny Atkinson wants to keep DeAndre Hunter in the unit with Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell because he likes how much Dean Wade has been able to play with Jared Allen. The two units that have had Dean Wade the most in it is with Jared Allen or Darius Garland this season. So I definitely think that those are the two biggest things when we talk about DeAndre Hunter's acclimation and why Max Strus might have gotten the starter minutes. But also, Max Strus was fighting for the starting job, and he came out firing, Chris. What did you think about his performance and knowing all of the things behind the scenes?
I just don't think this is a real conversation right now, Ethan. I don't. DeAndre Hunter is still finding his way. Kenny Atkinson is still figuring out the best ways to use him. He's still identifying the best combinations, the best five-man groupings. And the Cavs with Max Strus surrounding the core four is dominant. And you can sit here and you can say small sample size, but no, it's not a small sample size. It goes back to last year in a different system, one that didn't fit this team as well as the one does right now. And Max Strus with the core four was really, really effective for the Cavs. And Kenny Atkinson even brought that up. Like, there's a reason why the Cavs came into this year with no doubts of who their starting five was going to be. They were planning on it being Max, surrounded by there wasn't even a discussion. There wasn't even some kind of training camp competition. It was, why would we change that? There's nothing to change there. Max is a great fit alongside the core four. His movement, his shooting, his gravity, his two-man game with Evan Mobley, his two-man game with Jared Allen, his willingness and competitiveness on the defensive end of the floor, the way that he can set screens for Darius Garland or set screens for Donovan Mitchell and run actions that way. There's just like so many different things that he brings to this offense and to this defense that it wasn't even a conversation going into this year about who was going to start at small forward. Then obviously he got hurt. He missed the first 9 weeks of the season. The Cavs were rolling at that time. Dean Wade was being impactful as a starter. He was doing things that Kenny Atkinson liked. Then Dean goes down. They go to Max. And I don't know how you take him out of the starting group. And like, it almost doesn't matter because these guys are going to play starter minutes. DeAndre Hunter is going to play starter minutes, and he's going to finish a bunch of games, whether it's at the 4 spot, whether it's at the 3 spot, however Kenny Atkinson wants to do it. You know, I would not be surprised, Ethan, if one of the go-to lineups for the Cavs when it comes to closing games is Evan Mobley at the 5, DeAndre at the 4, Max Strus at the 3, and Darius and Donovan in the backcourt. That's something that Kenny's going to use. It's something that he's going to experiment with. And he should, because you have a bunch of versatility. You have a bunch of shooting. You have a bunch of offense and defense. And you got to find out, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? On paper, it looks pretty good. On paper, it seems pretty intriguing. But how does it look in an actual game situation? So Kenny's going to keep dabbling with different things. But I don't know how he could take Max out of the starting lineup right now. It is a team that when they have those 5 guys together, they're just pulverizing opponents. I mean, a net rating, and you could sit there and you could say small sample size, whatever, but a net rating of 32, what? That's unheard of in today's NBA. And it just goes to show how effective they are at both ends of the floor. And it's not just offensively, it's defensively too. So, you know, I know that Kenny likes Dean Wade in the starting lineup. I know that a lot of Cavs fans want to see DeAndre Hunter, and they're probably thinking of, what name are we going to come up with for the quintet? We got the core 4 now with DeAndre Hunter. What is it with the 5? But Max Strus is bringing to this starting lineup everything that you would want from a starting small forward. And those 5 guys together are incredibly effective. So I don't think it's really that much of a conversation right now. Max is making it so it's really difficult to have any kind of conversation about pulling him out of the starting lineup.
Yeah, Chris, and I mean you continuously talk about, and as I mentioned earlier, the net rating is substantial, like 32.3 over a sample size of 97 minutes together for the core four. I mean, that's the third most used lineup for this team this season. Right when you talk about 5-man lineups, that's the third most used lineup, and we talked about how the defensive rating this season for the Cavs has also been fluctuating. But when it comes to Max Strus, this is the most like stability that I can point out when it comes to a game to game basis. Entering tonight's game, the Cavs, with their 5-man lineup of Max Strus alongside the core four, had an offensive rating of 120.1. They had a defensive rating of 94.8 for a net rating of 25.3. Remember when I said that offensive rating bumped up 7 points per 100 possessions? Yeah. That's exactly the amount that it raised up to after tonight's game. And the defense and the net rating bumped up with it. You know why? Because the defensive rating stayed the exact same. That is what it comes to, and like there is no better definition of stability when it comes to just statistically outlook and how guys can impact both ends of the floor. And Chris, I know we continuously
have. I think there's another thing too here, Ethan. I don't think we can overlook this. DeAndre likes coming off the bench, and he has thrived coming off the bench this year. This is a career year that DeAndre Hunter is having. Before he got traded, he was the Hawks' sixth man. He made like 3 or 4 starts for the Hawks, and that's it. The rest of the time, he was coming off the bench, and he was thriving in that role. And now look, part of the reason why he's having a career year is he's a different kind of player. He's been able to stay healthier than he has in years past. He hasn't been dealing with a bunch of nagging things. He hasn't been in and out of the lineup. It hasn't been about, okay, I'm in a rhythm, now I'm out of a rhythm, now I got to find my rhythm again. They don't have DeJounte Murray anymore, so that took one high-usage ball handler, ball-dominant player away, and they've been exploring different ways to use DeAndre Hunter, or at least they did before the trade. So that's the other variable to this whole thing. DeAndre Hunter is one of the front runners for 6th man of the year. He has shown, 1, a willingness to come off the bench, and 2, an ability to be effective in that kind of role. Like, it's not for everybody, right? Some guys prefer to start. Some guys prefer to come off the bench. Some guys are better when it comes to starting. Some guys are better coming off the bench. Some guys, it just messes with them when you yo-yo them in the starting lineup, out of the starting lineup. It's a comfortability thing. And if you have this asset in DeAndre Hunter, who likes coming off the bench and can thrive coming off the bench, and he has shown more of an effectiveness in that particular role than, say, Max Strus, then don't you try and do what you think is going to make each individual player comfortable and do the thing that is going to make the team as a whole more comfortable? I would think so. And DeAndre has been upfront about it. And look, Max is the same way. He's not going to sit there and say, well, I'd prefer to start or whatever. They're both team guys. They're both willing to make whatever sacrifices required. And they've both talked about, hey, like, I'm just going to do whatever it is that Kenny wants me to do, whatever it is that Kenny Atkinson asks me to do. And I'm going to try and find my way from that. But it just feels like, to me, the most effective version of Max Strus is in a starting role. And quite possibly the most effective version of DeAndre Hunter that we've ever seen throughout the course of his career is in a bench role, in a 6-man role. So why mess with that? And Dean Wade's another conversation entirely, because Kenny likes him in that starting group, and Dean was effective in that starting group. And their numbers with Dean in that starting group as a whole, in terms of team success, really, really good. So that's another variable here, but it's hard to have that conversation when he's not playing right now and he's not healthy right now. But I think, as long as all these guys are okay with whatever role you put them in, and as long as, Kenny is open and honest and transparent with these guys about it, I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think it's just organically going to work itself out.
I agree. And I think the most important thing is just like you said, Chris, continuing to figure out what's best for the organization, what's best for the players, where they fit in best, and that's what our favorite thing about Kenny Atkinson has been, is that he has been willing to try different things, and that's like the adjustment on the fly. Again, we talked about the lineups that are possible, but Kenny has experimented with DeAndre coming in a little bit sooner than Donovan and Evan and playing him alongside Darius and Jarrett and seeing how that looks and how that works. And then bringing in Donovan and Evan to take out Darius and Jarrett in their respective minutes. So I definitely think when you talk about all these things and surrounding Max Strus, but I think the biggest one when it comes to the Cavs fan base, and not to bash on them because we love them and we couldn't do this stuff without them, right? We couldn't have the website and the podcast and all these other things. But when it comes to certain players, it takes more for them to understand the impact that certain players have. Max Strus, Dean Wade are two of the key and common like players that we look at getting the most disrespect when it comes to the Cavs. And Max, as we knew last year, well, more so Dean Wade.
That comes with the territory, right? Like, people aren't going to frown upon Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, right? Like, there's not too much within their games that you're going to criticize. Now, sometimes Jarrett does get criticism because they want him to be a little bit tougher. They want him to be more physical. They want him to be more engaged from start to finish. But that comes with the territory, too, when you're the fourth member of the core four as opposed to the first three. So I think some of these things are just, like, natural, right? Like, yeah, you're going to point more to Max Strus. You're going to point more to Dean Wade. You pointed more to George Niang when he was here. Karis LeVert, same kind of thing. Because really, what is there to criticize with Evan Mobley? What is there to criticize with Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell? Those guys, it's not that they get a pass, right? But they don't often do anything that warrants that level of being put under a microscope.
I mean, fair. But my point being that, like, we have to understand that every player, now even more than before the trade deadline, every player outside of probably Jalen Tyson and Craig Porter Jr., who I bet if we were having this conversation in front of Kenny Atkinson would argue with me, saying those two are as important as well. But, like, of the top, say, 12 players on the roster, like, almost everybody has a significant role to play when called upon. Max Strus and Dean Wade are at the top of that because we know coming out of last season, those were two of the top net-rated players on the entire Cavs roster. So I think statistically based, people understand. The eye test can sometimes be deceiving. But I want to get into the last portion of this podcast, Chris, and it's more of a funny portion of it. I know I talked about the stat that the Cavs have tripled the amount of their record for the amount of 130 point or more games in a season already. But Tristan Thompson dunked the ball in for the last 2 points to push them over 130 to get that 15th game. What was going on there? Did you get a chance to talk to Tristan after the game? Because that was interesting.
So for one of the rare times this year, the locker room was not actually open to media, only because the Cavs had a flight to catch, and it is miserable here in Toronto. And there's a lot of conversation that they're probably going to close the airport around midnight tonight. I don't even know if I'm going to get home tomorrow, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know how I'm going to get home tomorrow from Toronto because this is a massive snowstorm. In fact, like, I went outside, and I normally stay a lot closer to the arena. The prices were a little bit higher than usual, but the hotel's closer to the arena. You don't have to go outside. You can walk this thing that's called the Path. It's one of the greatest creations in history. It's like an underground tunnel system in Toronto, and sometimes you go up, sometimes you go down, but whatever. You can basically get from downtown Toronto to another city called Bloor, where they have this awesome mall, without going outside. You just walk 30 minutes without going outside at all. And usually I stay closer to the arena in this hotel that is connected to the Path, where I don't have to go outside. I just go out of my room, down an elevator, through a hallway, and the rest of my walk is all indoors. I'm staying at a different place, right by the water, which is effing cold as can be. But it had a great rate, and I was like, hey, this is going to be a really cool environment. It's going to be a really cool vibe. It overlooks the CN Tower, like all those different things. So I walked to the arena. It's about 10 to 15 minutes. It has no connection to the path. It was all outdoors. So if you look at my face closely, I've got all these red splotches from wind burn. Yeah, apparently that's a thing in Toronto. I got wind burn on my face. And all the people with the Toronto Raptors PR was like, what happened to your face? Why is your face so red? And Ty Jerome in the locker room before the game, he's like, dude, why are you out of breath? And I was like, dude, I'm still catching my breath from my 10-minute hike up Everest to Scotiabank Arena here. So that's all to say that it's a nasty snowstorm here in Toronto. So much so that the Cavs charter flight couldn't get here. They're flying commercial home because that was what was available to them. And they were in such a rush to get out of here and get to the airport before it closes because they had a deadline to reach that we weren't in the locker room after the game. It was all of the players brought to us in the hallway just outside the locker room. And it's whoever was going to be ready the fastest. That was the deal that we made for one game only. So we did talk to Kenny Atkinson about the whole Tristan Thompson thing. Kenny said, I don't know what he was thinking. He did say that. He didn't love it that Tristan did that. Obviously, the Raptors didn't love it. The people that were still in the arena booed him heartily. They didn't like it either. The two teams had to be separated. But we did not talk to Tristan. We did not talk to Donovan. We talked to Sam Merrill and Evan Mobley because they were ready the fastest to get out of there and get to the flight. So under any other circumstance, we would have been in the locker room and we would have been talking to Tristan and some of the other guys. But because we didn't go in the locker room at all, there was no opportunity for that. So Tristan didn't speak on it. But I don't know what he was thinking either. It wasn't the best look. I can tell you that many of the media members for the Toronto Raptors in the media center, as I was filing my gamer and I was transcribing quotes and all that kind of stuff, they repeatedly talked about that moment. And the word classless came up about 52 times during the time that I was actually in the media center. So nobody was really happy about that moment from Tristan. And like I said, when you have Kenny Atkinson, a guy who, he's pretty cautious about the things that he says, both pregame and postgame, for him to sit there and say, I don't know what Tristan was thinking. That was pretty telling that it wasn't the best moment for Tristan Thompson.
Yeah, and not in fairness to the Raptors reporters, I mean, the opposing team head coach, Darko, the Raptors head coach, said, I think what Tristan did there was no class and disrespectful.
Right.
So I think, I don't know what, obviously we can't know what was going through Tristan's head, but like, I don't know if he knew about the record and was like, I want to get the 15th game on our record book, whatever, in my home in Toronto. Like, I don't know. Like, you are from Canada, bro. Like, you would think, especially because all the love that you got for Vince Carter, his jersey is now hanging in the rafters. Like, you would think that he would be a little smarter or a little bit more cautious with his move. But I don't know. It's the end. It's nearing the All-Star break. It's Tristan Thompson. Maybe he wanted to get a couple blows in before he hopped on the obviously nobody's happy for a team that's used to taking private jets to take a commercial flight. That could have been a reason. He could have been thinking about having to get and stuff next to somebody on Southwest. I don't know.
I mean, look, when February 20th rolls around and the Cavs are starting the unofficial second half of the season against the Brooklyn Nets, nobody is going to remember that. I'm not going to remember it tomorrow when I wake up. I would think that the Raptors will get over it quickly. I'll say this, if Tristan is still around and playing in the NBA next year, when he comes back to Scotiabank Arena, whether it's with the Cavs or another team in the NBA, he's going to get booed. He's going to get booed by the Raptors faithful. They're going to remember it probably a little bit more than, the Cavs, or it's just going to be a blip moving forward. The other thing that I'll say about tonight's game, Ethan, that I thought was an important thing is throughout the course of the last week and a half or so, Kenny Atkinson has shown the Cavs basically where they stand in terms of defensive rating. And at one point, they were top 10, but they were not top 5. And players were not happy about that. This is a prideful group. This is a group that has elevated the standard throughout the course of this season because they expect to win every single game that they play. They expect to put on a great performance at both ends of the floor every game that they play. And when there's like minor slip-ups throughout the course of a game or throughout the course of a week, they're aware of it and they're not happy about it because there's a standard that they have set for themselves. So they want to be a top 5 defense. That is a goal of theirs by the end of the season. And for the last week and a half, Kenny specifically has challenged Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. And he's challenged both of those guys to be more vocal, to be louder, to communicate better. And part of that is because the Cavs keep switching defenses, right? They go from man, then into box and one, then into zone. They do all these different things on the defensive end of the floor. That requires focus. That requires attention to detail. But mostly it requires communication, especially when it comes to switching. That is at the heart of a switch-heavy scheme. You got to communicate. Everybody has to be on the same page. So Kenny has challenged Tristan and Evan, quiet by nature, to be louder. And you're seeing evidence of that. Tristan and Jarrett were great defensively tonight. They helped set the tone defensively. They were protecting the rim. They were making everything difficult for the Raptors, especially in the first quarter where the Cavs took a 41-17 lead by the end of those 12 minutes. And behind the scenes, whether it's in practice or shoot around, like as a sarcastic dig to Kenny, because he's been so hard on Jarrett and Evan, and he's like repeating himself constantly when it comes to communicate, over-communicate, loud, obnoxious to a point with how much he's drilling it to these guys. Jarrett and Evan are doing this thing in practice and shoot around where they're calling out what it is they need to call out like 3 straight times and looking directly at Kenny Atkinson while doing it, saying, yes, we get the point. We're trying our best. But you're seeing signs of the Cavs taking those things to heart and really trying to implement them in a game environment. And I know it was Toronto tonight, and I know it was Minnesota the other night without Julius Randle. But the defensive effort and the lack of clear breakdowns and the lack of communication errors that you're seeing, it's all a product of what the Cavs are doing behind the scenes and the standard that they have set for themselves on the defensive end of the floor. That was just an awesome start to the game defensively for the Cavs. I mean, like everything that Toronto was trying to get offensively was either taken away from them or they had to work so hard just to get quality looks.
Yeah, and that's something that I wrote about after the Minnesota Timberwolves game, just about the defensive mindset of this team and also how hard it is and the importance of getting Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen to be vocal, especially because we understand that that's out of their comfort zone. And that's kind of been the key for Kenny Atkinson, is continuing to put players in uncomfortable situations so that when they get to the later portions of the season, and especially into the playoffs, that it is not uncomfortable, or if it is, it's like to the bare minimum, and it's to the point where they are utilizing stuff that when it's the schemes, when it's the concepts, when it's the principles that they have instilled, it's ingrained into their brain to the point that it's muscle memory. The fact that they might not notice that they're talking as loud as they are. It happens to me all the time. But I just think it's definitely something to keep an eye on when it comes to this Cavs team, and also knowing how much of a backbone Evan Mobley and Jared are, and how they are kind of the tone setters on the defensive end, specifically how important that'll be for them going forward. And obviously we understand that the Cavs defensive rating has been much, much better into February than it was in January, when they were around 29th in the NBA, very close to the Washington Wizards in that category. And now they kind of snap back to their reality of their defensive identity and have stabilized themselves as, again, knowing that they can be one of the better defenses in the NBA. I think they're top 8 in the NBA right now in defensive rating. With all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where, if you want to, and if Chris gets stuck in Toronto tomorrow, you can send him food recommendations. But I know for a fact we will be sending out a Hey Chris text tomorrow, where you guys can send in all of your questions, all of your thoughts on the first half of the season for the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's just 28 games left. So make sure you make do and sign up and subscribe so that you can get the insider coverage that you deserve when it comes to this team, the top of the Eastern Conference, as they head into the second half of the season. But to do all of this, you need to sign up for a 14-day free trial, or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who signed up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.